Good evening. Welcome to the Leo Baeck Institute tonight. My name is Markus Krah. I'm the Executive Director of LBI, and I want to welcome you to another event of the LBI Forum on Psychoanalysis and Society. This is the second installment in this series of 3 events, but don't worry in case that you missed the first one last week. Today's event, it was great, but today's event can stand well on its own. That said, you should totally come to the third installment too next week, a week from today. It's a great series, and I want to give a shout out to my colleague Stephanie Addis, who put this together, LBI's Program and Communications Manager. Thank you, Stephanie. Today's event is entitled The Secret Mind of Bertha Pappenheim, Psychoanalysis in German Jewish History. So this is spot on with the mission of the Leo Baeck Institute to preserve the history of German-speaking Jews and to show how this history has shaped a legacy in many fields of life that is still relevant to this day. And that is certainly the case for psychoanalysis, which was shaped in significant ways by German-speaking Jews, each reflecting on their own personal, political, cultural, and social environments. Bertha Pappenheim, of course, looms large in this context, as many of you will know, and about whom we will hear much more tonight. She was born in 1859 in Vienna, and some of you may know of her under her pseudonym Anna O., under which she was treated in the 1880s by Josef Breuer, Sigmund Freud's great mentor, and Breuer and Freud later wrote about her case. But Pappenheim is rightly known also in her own right as a feminist and social pioneer. She was the first and longtime president of the League of Jewish Women, Jüdischer Frauenbund, in the early 1900s. And she was also the founder of many educational and welfare institutions, most prominent among them the Home for Jewish Girls in the German town of Neu-Isenburg, Mädchenwohnheim Neu-Isenburg near Frankfurt. This institution started in 1907 and operated until it was destroyed by the Nazis. Pappenheim was spared from seeing that as she passed away in 1936. Let me mention here that the Neu-Isenburg home is the topic of an episode of LBI's podcast Exile, hosted by Mandy Patinkin, which you should absolutely subscribe, download, listen to, forward, and recommend to everybody else. You can find out about the podcast and about our other activities in our anniversary year. LBI is turning 70 this year, by subscribing to our online newsletter and printed newsletter, and if you don't do so already, you're doing something wrong. Back to Bertha Pappenheim. As you can tell from this very brief sketch of her life, this is a life that could fill much more than one evening and speaks to many topics of German Jewish history and beyond. So we are fortunate to hear more about all that tonight, and thankfully this program will not be run by me, but we have 2 wonderful speakers talking to us about this topic. They will have a conversation, and we will then open it up to your comments and questions before concluding with a little reception outside in the Great Hall. So let me introduce our 2 speakers. Gabriel Brownstein is a professor in the English department at St. John's University and the author of several books, the winner of a PEN/Hemingway Award for his short stories. His most recent book of nonfiction is what got him to LBI tonight. It is entitled The Secret Mind of Bertha Pappenheim, the Woman Who Invented Freud's Talking Cure. He will present his book and discuss his insights with Abby Kluchin. Abby is assistant professor of philosophy and religious studies at Ursinus College. She coordinates its gender, women, and sexuality studies program and is also the associate director at large of the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research and a co-host of the greatly named psychoanalysis podcast, Ordinary Unhappiness. And I believe we share at least 2 topics among our podcasts, Hilde Mosse and Bertha Pappenheim and the Neu-Isenburg home. So on that happy or unhappy note, welcome to all of you. Welcome to Gabe and Abby. Thank you for coming, and I look forward to an inspiring evening. Please, come up.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Abby, Thanks everyone for coming. It's really beautiful hall. Impressive to see everyone here. Thank you. I'm going to start by reading two very short sections of my book. The book's called Secret Mind of Bertha Pappenheim. And I'm not going to introduce her. We'll talk about her a little later. But one is from when she was young and a patient. It gives you a sense of her treatment under Josef Breuer and how she was treated then. And then the second section is from when she was older, running since you said it so perfectly, I can't say it right, the Judische Freudenbund, which I can't say in German. So I'll read you briefly. So she's about 20 years old. Her father has just died. She's suffering from hysteria. And her doctor, Josef Breuer, has brought in Richard von Krafft-Ebing, the famous sexologist, to look at her and observe her in her hysteria. The section I'll read it interpolates sections from Studies in Hysteria, sections from Breuer's correspondences, and my own writing. On April 14th, 1881, just after the mourning period ended, and after the first 2 nights of Passover had passed, Breuer brought a consultant to the apartment. He is unnamed in Studies, but in the notes is identified as Richard von Krafft-Ebing, whose masterwork, Sexual Psychopathy, a Clinical Forensic Study, would appear the year after he visited the Pappenheim apartment. Krafft-Ebing was square-headed, powerful, with a mustache and clean-shaven chin. They met not in Bertha Pappenheim's bedroom, but in a parlor. She was sitting up reading what Breuer calls the clown scene in Hamlet. I don't know what that is. She ignored Krafft-Ebing completely, as she did all strangers. Breuer writes in Studies, he calls this phenomenon a negative hallucination. Breuer showed off more of her symptoms to his colleagues. I demonstrated all her peculiar characteristics. He brought with him some writing in French and showed it to Pappenheim. That's like an examination, she said, laughing. She teased Breuer gently and then read the words aloud, but in English, translating it as if automatically. One of the weird features of her hysteria was she could only speak English, which was not her native language, you know. She spoke a lot of languages, but when hysterical, she could only speak English, which means she said the words, the talking cure, in English. Krafft-Ebing tried to intervene in the conversation to make her notice him, but in vain. The great sexologist must have been unaccustomed to being snubbed by an attractive young woman. He stabbed her leg with a needle. This is in the notes, but not in Studies. And she cried out, but kept ignoring him. He lit a piece of paper on fire, and he blew the smoke in her face. This final test, Breuer writes in his notes, turned out successfully, but it was rather unpleasant. She saw a stranger, and she tried to run away. She rushed to the door to take out the key, but she didn't make it out of the door. My guess is the key was gone and the door was locked. She fell to the ground, unconscious. There followed a short burst of anger, and then a bad attack of anxiety, which I had great difficulty calming down. After this, Breuer was gone for several days, traveling. During his absence, Breuer writes, Pappenheim maintained total abstinence. She ate nothing, she drank nothing, she didn't sleep, and I suppose she didn't take her medicine. She was given chloral hydrate, which is not prescribed anymore. By the time her doctor returned from his holiday trip, her condition had changed. She had gone without food the whole time, was full of anxiety, and her hallucinatory absences were filled with terrifying figures, death's heads, and skeletons. The argument that she's drug sick is compelling. She'd been taking large doses of chloral for weeks, and then she seems to have abruptly stopped. The days took on a new shape from April to June. She was drowsy all afternoon and towards evening fell into a deep hypnosis, And that's when Breuer sat with her, and more stories emerged. She talks to him. That's the talking cure. Alison Andrews suspects that Breuer's bedside presence calmed her, that he gave her a small dose of chloral to counteract her DTs, and that dosed with drugs, she recounted her terrors. Breuer writes, her mind was relieved when, shaking with fear and horror, she had reproduced these frightful images and given utterance to them. After her storytelling session, according to Breuer, she would wake up lucid, calm, and cheerful. And then she would sit down to work and write or draw far into the night, and was quite reasonable. She was overflowing with fiction. She's constantly writing. Her mind was falling apart. In May, Breuer writes, the evening presentations ceased to resemble more or less spontaneous poetic compositions and turned instead into a series of dreadful and terrifying hallucinations. If each evening she was calmed by Breuer, all day she was a terror to her family. She threatened to kill herself, saying she would jump out the window. Recha and William, still mourning Sigmund, that's her mother and brother mourning her father, must have been desperate. Finally, on June 2nd, 2 months after her father's death, she was taken from the apartment, quote, without deception, but not without force. I imagine the orderlies, large, polite, intimidating men. I imagine the girl screaming and kicking, the flurry of her skirts as she is carried down the stairs and forced into a carriage, the hoofbeats on the cobblestone as they move her out of town. In the shaking carriage, she went deaf and lost her ability to scream. That's true. When things shook, she couldn't talk, she couldn't hear. Okay. So here's 1912, 30 years later. She's 50, which in 1912 is not young. And this will give you a sense of how powerful this woman was. This is her letter. Oh no, I'm on the wrong page. Sorry. This is later. This is 1924. It's a letter she writes to the banker Felix Warburg, a fundraising letter. It's also an adventure story. She's recovering one of those Eisenberg children, Irmchen Weingart, from a bad foster home. In the story she tells, Pappenheim travels by train and cart and foot from Eisenberg to Frankfurt to Krumstad, a small Jewish island of 16 families, 6 children, 3 of school age, a dying community. To buy her ticket, she has to go to a shack in the woods, and she is traveling with a baby in a carriage. So she's 60, okay? She's a 60-year-old Jewish woman, like a ball of fire, like this. I had no choice but to walk through the underbrush, roots, holes, fallen leaves, or take a longer path. The baby, Emmy, gets dropped off in Frankfurt, and then Pappenheim falls in with a desperate, cramped, and dirty crowd of train passengers. To understand the conditions in Germany, so Germany's falling apart, right? One only has to look and listen in a fourth-class car, tired, worn, angry faces, and what rags, what talks, how one has to slave to earn nothing at all these millions by nothing. Bread is 600 billions, today 850 billions. A pale, sickly woman sitting next to me seemed not to have learned the price yet. She bobbed up desperately, repeating, 600 billions. After the next change of trains, she meets a red-haired Galician Jew who is being harangued by an angry crowd. He was being battered by violently hostile words as by a hailstorm. His answers in Yiddish evoked furious laughter. When she finishes the last leg of her train ride, she finds that the phone at the station is broken, and she breaks into the back entrance of a general store where she is welcomed warmly. The woman inside knows Pappenheim because I had raised her late husband's sister-in-law's cousin at the girls' orphanage in Frankfurt. She is given soup and then rides in a horse-drawn potato wagon. It got dark. The landscape was unattractive. Icy wind, this is her words, not mine. It got dark. The landscape was unattractive. Icy wind and half-freezing rain, rather unpleasant. I wore an old military coat, heavy, stiff, but not warm. Finally, in Krumstad, she sleeps on a couch in another Jewish home, her clothes padded with old newspapers for warmth. In the morning, her hostess gives her ersatz coffee, good bread, homemade jam. She is offered a pat of butter and cream, but Pappenheim says, I definitely had to refuse. She would not take from these people what luxuries they had left. Finally, she recovers the poor girl, Irmchen, from a family that cannot keep her and travels the reverse route back home. But now I would have to walk through the woods with a tired child and many parcels. I was undecided. It was an hour's walk. A good old Frankfurt cab driver noticed my problem, and as a talkative widower who had raised 7 children, he offered to wait for half an hour, still more waiting, for passengers for the next train. It was late, no one got off. The kind driver took us on. Autos passed, but our good horse trotted faithfully at last. At last we arrived in Frankfurt, where I left Irmchen with friends for the night. The fare was quite reasonable, only in $1.5 billion. I walked home. So I guess that's the split in this woman. It's very hard to reconcile this young woman who is so ill and under such care, and this older woman who seems capable of just about anything. So that's the problem in understanding her.
Gabe, I'm so excited I have so many questions for you, but I have to say first that I loved this book. And I loved it for a lot of reasons, not least of which that it's a beautiful and heartbreaking piece of writing. But it also made me see a lot of things that I thought I knew with new eyes. And it really, for anybody that's invested in psychoanalysis, it just thoroughly unsettles all of these tidy stories about hysteria, about Anna O, about Bertha Pappenheim, about Freud, about Josef Breuer. It really cuts to the heart of some of the sort of like essential stories that psychoanalysis tells about its own birth, about its own coming into the world. So I'm hoping we can start with the story of Anna O, which is an indispensable part of this story of the founding of psychoanalysis. But Bertha Pappenheim, the real Anna O, the one who coins the phrase, the talking cure, it's hers, right? It's not Breuer's, it's not Freud's. She was profoundly misrepresented. It's not too strong a word to characterize parts of the Anna O case study, as you do in your book, as lies, right? Or at best as omissions. So can we talk first a little bit about the salient features of the case study and this sort of enormous gulf between what happened, to the extent that we can know what happened, and then the way that Breuer and eventually Freud wrote and talked about Bertha Pappenheim? Because the gulf between those two things is, frankly, I think, really shocking for anyone who is invested in the field of psychoanalysis and its legacies. So I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about its implications.
Sure. First, thank you. Thank you so much for those kind words. They mean a lot. And if I can just take a step back and just talk about how I came to writing this book, it was a very strange thing for me to have written. I didn't come to it as an expert in the field. The truth is, the night before my father died, he gave me what he called was his masterpiece, which was an essay he had written that had never been published. That was about Bertha Pappenheim. And I became interested in that and became a little obsessed with it. And then I was having lunch with my editor, and he said, do you have another book that you'd like to write? And I said, not really. And he said, is there anything you're interested in? And I started talking about it, and I was like, I can't write this book. And he said, yes, you can. And I fell into it. I became obsessed. And so I come to this story not from psychoanalysis, but from outside of it. Yeah, it was a very difficult time for me while I was writing it. My wife died while I was writing it. And Freud says that the process of poetry is the same as the process of hysteria. I don't know what he means by that. I have no idea. But I felt like the story I was writing was sort of keeping my head together you know, and that's how I came to this subject. Okay, so Anna O. Maybe we should do Freud and Breuer first, and then, and help me with Freud and Breuer. Okay,
Sure.
so
Maybe should we just set the stage in terms of like what the book is? I brought
Yeah,
the
yeah,
book.
please,
I
please.
mean, as a good student, I brought the book.
good.
This is Studies on Hysteria. Do you want to say a little bit about?
Okay, Studies in Hysteria is a book co-written by Breuer and Freud. It's Freud's first book
1895.
in what would become psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
The book has 3 essays, a co-written essay by Freud and Breuer, an essay by Breuer, kind of long and boring, an essay by Freud, totally mind-blowing and brilliant, and
His 5 case studies.
5 case studies,
The first of which is Anna O.
the first of which is Anna O. And
It's the first. So there's 5 case studies. The first is Anna O, which is by Breuer, and then the next 4 are all by Freud.
And one thing you should understand is that now we all think it's this, you know, major work of history, but I think it's important to contextualize. It sold like 636 copies when it came out.
Yeah.
Freud was
Was not a runaway hit.
No,
Yeah.
Freud was completely unknown. Breuer was the major neurologist in Vienna, or one of. So Breuer's little one essay, which now seems the least important part of, well, the least beautifully written part of the book, is the beginning of psychoanalysis. It's the discovery moment. She is talking to him, and he is taking care of her. And he does this 13 years before the book came out. He didn't want to write or publish the Anna O case.
Yeah.
Freud convinced him to.
Like kicking and screaming, basically. Yeah.
Say,
Freud like dragged him into it.
kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
He did not want to do it. And but we should talk about why it's important historically as the birth of psychoanalysis, So Breuer treated Pappenheim by letting her tell stories.
Yeah.
And she talked to him, and she called it the talking cure. And Breuer claimed to have cured her through this.
Mm-hmm.
He said that she was in perfect health thereafter.
Yeah. So spoiler, she was not.
Spoiler, she was not.
If you read the case study, and it doesn't have the sort of, Freud is the sort of master of the case study as genre, for sure. If that's something you're interested in, you definitely should read the other 4.
Right.
But
we have to also do what Freud comes back to it later.
yeah.
And he starts telling stories about Anna O.
Yeah.
Because he kind of wants to take over psychoanalysis from Breuer. And he tells this story, which he writes first in the 1920s, when, in fact, the actual Bertha Pappenheim is in Vienna, campaigning for women's suffrage.
Yeah.
And Freud begins to write stories that she suffered at the end a hysterical pregnancy and cried out, "Dr. B's baby is coming."
This was a fabrication.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say it that bluntly. So the story of psychoanalysis, as it becomes like the official tale, has this hysterical pregnancy and Anna O's desperate sexual attraction to Breuer encoded in it.
Yeah. And I mean, I should also say, if you read Anna O, the case study, you get the image of, something that's sort of like this in a lot of ways, except more intimate, right? It's Breuer is coming to Bertha Pappenheim's house all of the time, like day after day, and she's telling him everything. She's talking, at least the concept is she's talking away her symptoms.
She's telling fairy tales.
She's
mostly.
telling fairy tales.
She's not doing what we do in therapy.
Right. Because
She's
it
just
doesn't
this,
exist yet.
She is just this font of stories.
Yeah.
I mean, Pappenheim, among other things, wrote, I think, 3 books of short fiction, a play, endless journalism,
She was a translator.
She was
also.
a translator. Memoirs of her trips to whorehouses in Jaffa and Russia, and she just traveled the world. But she wrote intensely, and she was full of stories.
Yeah.
And in this therapy session, she told fairy tales, apparently. But we don't really know, because Breuer doesn't give us any of the stories she tells.
Yeah, I think it's important that we say also that the narrative in the case study, I was going to say implies, but it's not implies, actually straight out states that she's completely healed. In fact, and it also seems as though that it is basically something that takes place within the home, within her home. In fact, she's institutionalized multiple times, and a lot of what doesn't go into the text, and which subsequent scholars, and this is all in your book also, including some that are deeply, deeply critical of Freud, but others who are just interested in the historical record, point out that Bertha Pappenheim is struggling with an addiction to morphine and an addiction to chloral, both chloral hydrate, yes, both of which Breuer gives her to treat first she has facial neuralgia, facial pain, and because she can't sleep. So many of the symptoms that show up in the Anna O case, which don't really look a lot like hysteria in certain ways, that look in some ways more like psychosis. Many scholars have suggested that in fact a lot of this had to do with withdrawal, that a lot of this case is actually about drugs, that it's about addiction and withdrawal.
And the thing is, they really knew it when they published the book.
Yeah.
Like, Bertha Pappenheim's father was Martha Freud's guardian.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is like Freud's almost sister-in-law.
Yeah.
Bertha came to the Freud apartment on several occasions between the time she was treated by Breuer and the time the book came out. Martha wrote letters to her mother about how Bertha was doing. Breuer wrote a letter where she said she would be better off dead. They absolutely knew about her struggles, her suicidality, her addictions, all these things that she suffered in the 12 years between her treatment and the publication of the book.
Yeah.
She went to Frankfurt. She left Vienna. She fell in with, can we go to her real life?
Yeah, sure.
So we've left out all the things about her father dying and everything like that.
Oh yeah, that's it. Sorry. That's
but-
important.
But
That precipitates a lot of her symptoms. Her father dying.
Her father gets sick. She's nursing her father, and that's when she begins to lose it for a number of reasons. I mean, but she moves to Frankfurt. She falls in with a community of Jewish women who are socially engaged in a synagogue. Her wealthy mother's family is from Frankfurt, and she begins to volunteer. She begins to work with children. She begins to have this strong interest in what's called the Mädchenhandel, the trade in young women, the girl business. This was a thing I didn't know about. Large numbers of, so in Frankfurt and in Vienna, there were these large middle class and wealthy Jewish populations. But in Eastern Europe, there were all these towns being set upon by marauders, and all these women being taken into prostitution, as happens with poor, marginalized, terrorized women. And Pappenheim's life work became her crusade against the Mädchenhandel. And all of the things that Marcus mentioned were part of that. And she was not at all interested in psychoanalysis. and she never revealed her connection with it. And she was, in 1910, when the two of them, Freud and Pappenheim, separately came to the United States, she was the far, far more well-known one of the two. Her organization, the JBF, at its height, I think, I wish I had the number in front of me, 1 in 5
of all the eligible women
of Jewish women in
German-speaking
Europe
countries,
belong.
they were involved in it. It was the numbers are just staggering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thousands of people's lives were improved by this woman's work.
Yeah.
So.
She was I think that's great. I mean, she was by all accounts kind of difficult to work with. One of my favorite things in investigating Bertha Pappenheim was coming across all of the obituaries. I know you talk about this a little bit in your book that she wrote for herself. She wrote at least 5 in advance of her death. She wrote her own obituary for a variety of audiences. Like Bertha Pappenheim was this, and the other thing, and they would say something generally kind of complimentary about her, and then all of these things that the envisioned audience would not have liked about her, and they all end, what a pity.
She fought
just
with
remarkable.
Everybody. She fought with everybody.
I mean, I think it's also just given where we are, one of the things that shows up, and it is in fact the case in the Anna O case study, is the way that Bertha Pappenheim is deeply uninterested in her family's Judaism when the treatment begins. And that's something that changes enormously in her later work, her relationship to Judaism. She does become a fervent anti-Zionist. That's a significant part of her later life. But I've always thought of her, because she also, the institution at Neu-Isenburg is an orphanage, right? I've always thought of her as deeply attuned to like the widow and the orphan, right? She's really interested in who are the members of society, and she's really thinking about this in terms of gender, and she's thinking about it in terms of religion. She's like Jewish women are her demographic, but particularly Jewish women who do not have advocates. She became their advocate. And there's something, Gabe started out with us trying to bridge these two, like the sort of unbridgeable gulf of Anna O and Bertha Pappenheim. And, her symptoms, and subsequent critics have made a lot of this, her symptoms, a lot of them are about speech. They're about language. Right? So you don't have to be a psychoanalyst or a literary critic to make those sorts of connections, to understand the ways in which she early on was in some ways silenced, but found ways to speak other ways through the body, and then later on in her own work devotes her life to being a voice for women, specifically Jewish women, who don't have advocates. So there's this way, and I mean, maybe we can talk about this more, but I've always thought that despite the way in which Breuer and Freud do her terribly dirty, right? Like they really do. They do her dirty. Breuer in particular, I think, in certain ways. We can argue about this. But she's such a force, and I think that really came out in that second passage that you're reading, is that there's something that was so irrepressible about her that even when she's the object of a case study rather than like a subject or an agential being in the world, something of her comes through, like that creativity, where we're sitting on stage talking about her. There is no talking cure without Bertha Pappenheim. Yeah.
Right, and that's important that Ernest Jones says that she is, Ernest Jones is Freud's acolyte and first biographer, and says she's the source of this. She is the person who brought catharsis to psychoanalysis. It was her idea that if you talked out your problems, you would feel better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
yeah, I mean, do you want to get into that a little bit, or should we talk about hysteria first? A little ground clearing.
Okay, hysteria is very difficult.
Might be helpful.
Ask me a question about hysteria.
Okay, what is this thing called hysteria? And also, well, I want to say a couple questions. what role does it play in the early days of psychoanalysis, and what role does it play in your book? Because this is, you're like, oh, there's a question.
Yeah, no, it's so...
because it's not the same, but it's also not totally different from what you're talking about in your book, which is functional neurological disorder, or FND. And this is a big part of the
my
book.
So what I tried to do in my book is really sort of an investigation and into imagination. I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to imagine this person, you know? And the gulf between what's written about her and who she actually was is so huge. And, you know, one of the things in trying to imagine her is trying to imagine her condition. How was she sick? She was diagnosed with hysteria. We don't use that word anymore for an illness. And when I went to school in college, I was told that it was a myth, that it was a patriarchal myth, that there was no such illness, that the epidemic of hysteria in the 19th century was just a story that was told and visited on people's bodies, women's bodies. Because people decided that hysteria didn't exist, there is a whole subset of writings about Bertha Pappenheim that speculate on her illness. What was the illness that she suffered? And kind of every single thing you can imagine, just about every single possible illness is named, right? It just can't be hysteria. And you know, so you have these terrible like slurs on her, like her feminism and her hysteria are the same thing, say like the early 20th century or the mid 20th century psychoanalysts, right? It's just another expression of man-hating. Her feminism is just hysterical. So this weird thing happened to me, which I did not expect to happen to me when I wrote the book, which is I fell in with all these doctors and patients who are studying this problem. And they're not marginal people. The doctor who I talked to most closely is David Perez. He's a psychiatrist and a neurologist, both, which is really weird, and a neuroscientist, and a member of the faculty at Harvard, and he has a functional neurological disorder clinic at Massachusetts General Hospital. He's not a marginal figure. He works closely with a guy named Mark Hallett, who's the lead brain investigator at the National Institutes of Health. I also spoke to doctors at the Mayo Clinic, and I spoke to a woman named Catherine Lefevre who had run clinics at Vanderbilt and Northwestern, all devoted to FND. And all of these people describe an illness whose name has changed, but is a continuous problem. What they all say is, if you think hysteria doesn't exist, you have never been to a neurology clinic. Okay. So what is this thing? It's the thing in the gap between neurology and psychiatry. It's like if your hand trembles or if you have a seizure, you may have an organic cause for that. You may have epilepsy or Parkinson's disease, right? You may also not. You can have what sometimes gets called psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, where are different than epileptic seizures. They tend to last longer than epileptic seizures. The patients tend to cry. They tend to arch their backs. But if you go into an epilepsy lab, you will not see seizure qualities to these people. And, you know, similarly, people can lose control of their legs. And Freud has a beautiful description of what he calls a hysterical paralysis. And he says it's the idea of paralysis, like the leg doesn't move for Elizabeth von
R.
Thank you. But but it doesn't fit any pattern of physical, organic disability. I'm sorry if I'm going on long, but it's really hard and I want to do it precisely.
No, it's good.
Okay,
Keep going.
so functional neurological complaints are the second most common reason, according to the Lancet, for patients going to, the Lancet is the big British medical journal, for patients going to neurologist's office. These are not uncommon phenomena. They very frequently have to do with the mouth, globus hystericus. And the conversation around these things and the definition of the category has changed tremendously, as with any illness, over 150 years, right? So things that were considered hysterical in Freud's time, hallucinations or suicidality, are no longer in the category of functional neurological disorder. Functional neurological disorder is, very specifically, there's something wrong with your body, but there is not an organic cause. It can happen in so many different ways. Someone gets a stroke and they have an organically paralyzed right leg, and they lose their ability to use their left leg. It just happens. Oliver Sacks's book, A Leg to Stand On, is about his loss of the use of one of his legs after an accident on a mountain climbing trip. The words are really tricky. So it's called hysteria, and then Freud changes it to hysterical conversion because he says it is repressed sexual desire being converted into a symptom. He gives an explanation, right? When the word hysteria drops out of medical usage, there's a guy named Elliot Slater, 1960-something, says it does not exist. He's a neurologist. It becomes called conversion disorder. Right now, in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatry, functional neurological disorder and conversion disorder are synonymous, and functional neurological disorder is the leading term of the two. Did I define that well?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
that was
okay?
Beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a not uncommon thing, and it's really hard to talk about. And most patients, when they come to a doctor and the doctor says, this is not an organic cause, this is a functional, will say, screw you, there's something wrong with my hand. My hand is paralyzed. What do you mean there's nothing wrong with my hand? But there are more and more patient groups. There's an organization called FND Hope. It's an international group. I was able to talk to a number of people who work in it who are patient advocates who say, yeah, we have FND, and we're working on it. And I think what really the doctors and patients want from us is not to view these people as hysterical, not to view them in a pejorative light. It's really, who hasn't had something like this? Who hasn't had the runs when they were nervous or a backache when they were heartbroken? Who hasn't been sick and imagined some other illness? We've all how many times did I have a sore throat during the COVID pandemic? We like to think that our brains and bodies are separate, that our minds and brains are separate. It's not clear that they are. I can talk more about FND forever, so I'll stop.
Well, I have some follow-ups. Bear with me. I'm going to land this plane, but I'm going to...
Can I just say one
go
thing?
ahead.
So thinking of it as an ordinary illness that happens to people
Yeah.
helped me imagine Bertha Pappenheim,
Yeah.
right? She just got sick. Nothing magical. Nothing It's a radical position in the history of writing about her, but what if Breuer was right? What if his diagnosis was accurate? And we try to talk about it in the terms that contemporary leading neurologists try to talk about it. then it becomes nothing fancy. She was under enormous stress. She lost control of herself. She was given horrible drugs. Her problems deepened.
The kind of aha moment in the case study of Anna O. Yeah, because where I'm going with this is to talk about sort of like meaning and narrative and all of these things that is okay. But I think it's important to know that for Breuer, the moment where we get the sort of okay, the talking cure worked, the symptom has been talked away, comes from this, like, frankly, gross little story where Bertha Pappenheim has been unable to drink anything for months. She is subsisting on, like, she's eating, like, melon, she's eating, like, wet fruit, essentially, like, that's the way that she's getting her liquids. She has, like, essentially, it's like hydrophobia. And finally, she talks away this symptom because as she's kind of doing this kind of daydreaming and recounting things to Breuer, she realizes that this governess who has like this awful yappy little dog, she saw the yappy. I'm making up the yappy part. It just sounds better. But it's a gross little dog. That part's important. She saw it lick a human water glass. And that grossed her out. And she was, after that, unable to drink water. And when she recovers the memory of seeing the little dog do this, she's like, okay, give me a glass of water. Like, here I am, ready to go. Like, that is, it sounds a little bit pat in certain ways, but the idea that I want you to get out of this and where I'm going, because one of the things that's so interesting and wonderful about Gabe's book is the way that he's talking about how neurologists dealing with FND are also in the business of meaning making in ways that we wouldn't necessarily think about neurologists being, or we might think that psychoanalysts are. So, there is this idea that there was something lurking beneath that symptom. Once it can be experienced, the conscious, the unconscious, this isn't actually there. Like, we don't really have the idea of a dynamic unconscious at this point, but still it's been made conscious. She can articulate it. It can go away, right? And one of the things that I love and I think is so spot on about your book is, I think you have kind of a fondness for Breuer in certain ways.
I like Breuer, and I have enormous respect for Freud.
Yes. But the part that I think that really comes through is the way that he listens, right? And you talk a lot about the roots of the talking cure as essentially like a listening cure. And I think this is, again, I think it's really spot on. There's something, Josef Breuer was the premier physician to the Jewish community in Vienna, right? The fact that Bertha Pappenheim had him coming to her house every day and being like, just listening, in a really intimate, ongoing way, it's a powerful thing, and
no one listened to her.
Most of us don't have that in our medical care, right? And so you frame in the book, the neurologists that you're talking to as involved in this kind of new talking / listening cure. And there's this line I want to read. So this is me quoting Gabe. From the hard-headed world of brain scans and fMRI, there's emerging a new kind of talking cure. A talking cure which, unlike the classic Freudian conversion disorder version, accepts the patient as an authority on their own condition. So I'm hoping you can tell us about a little bit about your conversations. You mentioned the conversations with the doctors, but with the patients, because that makes up so much of the book. And I think as a reader, you see all of this in the light of the Breuer, Bertha Pappenheim dyadic relationship and all of the both the listening and the not listening that came later. That's kind of lurking in the background of all of this.
All right, so I'm going to answer this. This is a very complicated question.
Sorry.
I'm going to give a really complicated answer, but I hope I can make it coherent. So I do really esteem Breuer. I think, Breuer was amazing. I mean, the exhale reflex is called the Herring-Breuer reflex.
Yeah.
He figured out how you exhale. He did incredible work on the inner ear and how we balance. He did interesting work on fevers and blood. He was a profound thinker, a profound man. He was not particularly interested in hysteria. Wasn't a big deal. But he paid incredible attention to Bertha Pappenheim. He was a wildly attentive man. He was friends with like the best composers, the best novelists. He was incredibly wealthy. He was just, he was the star doctor of Vienna in its glory. And he just spent hours and hours with listening to Bertha Pappenheim and observing her super carefully and describing it to his young, wild man of a friend, Sigmund Freud, who, from these stories, began to conceive of the dynamics of our identity and how we know ourselves and don't know ourselves. I mean, so we can trash them for their lies, but on the other hand, oh my God, they change the way we understand ourselves. So, Pappenheim tells these stories, Breuer listens, and gradually this becomes psychoanalytic theory. Psychoanalytic theory makes a very hydraulic kind of compression idea of conversion of, you want to have some kind of you have some sexual experience you don't like or you want, and you repress it, and it emerges in your body, and the reason you can't talk is because you have perverse sexual desires you can't name. You can understand why no one would want that diagnosis, right? The reason you can't walk is because you want to sleep with your father. Please, no, that's not helpful. I'm in a, no. Patients don't like that. But patients don't like being told there's nothing physically wrong also. And it's one of the essays, the neurologist essay said, what you need is a narrative with real healing power. What's really important is to listen to the patient's story and give them a narrative they can understand, control, and their acceptance of this narrative, which I can go on about, which is about the way different parts of the brain relate to itself. The idea, it's a working theory based on brain scans and treatments, is that networks in the brains of these people have become confused. So their emotional responses, their attentiveness, and their regulation of their body are not working in the ways that they would want them to. And there are what they say predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating factors, which vary widely among the different people who suffer these things. But the first thing you have to do to help them is to diagnose them accurately. You can't just say, there's nothing, one of the ways to diagnose, so if someone has a tremor, you can entrain it by asking them to press their fingers against their hand, and then they can stop trembling. And if they stop trembling, then you know that the bones, muscles, and nerves in their hand are all functional. They're all working. I used the wrong word, functional. There's no organic problem, right? There are tests you can do on people's feet, on people's eyes. You can observe their seizures and say, look, this is a brain-body problem. But patients have to accept that diagnosis. And they have to grasp that story. And it's very, very difficult for most people who have this problem to effectively retrain their minds. It's possible, but it usually is a lifetime struggle to learn to walk again, to learn to use your hands again, to learn to talk again. And these symptoms can move from your mouth to your hand, from one side. One of the things that happens that it's functional is if someone has facial paralysis and it moves from one side of the face to the other, right, then there's no neurological condition that corresponds with that. So, yeah, it's really the connection between doctor and patient is intense. And at Perez's lab, everybody gets their own treatment. You can get a speech therapist, a physical therapist. You can get drugs. There's a lot of comorbidity of anxiety, depression. A lot of these people have suffered terrible traumas, and there's talk therapy. But like each person who has this problem needs to have their own narrative and their own treatment. There's no one cure that you can do for somebody who has this.
Yeah. I mean, I think you make a really powerful case in the book that it's a legacy of the talking cure in a place where you wouldn't expect to find it. And from people from whom you wouldn't necessarily expect to be so invested in the sort of like power of cure as found in narrative.
Absolutely. And what's also so cool to me is the patients coming together.
Yeah.
Like no one's going to, and the name, it's a terrible name, functional neurological disorder.
It's not
it's
catchy.
Terrible. It's not catchy.
Yeah.
But nobody can say, we're the conversion disorder team.
Right.
We've all decided we can't sleep with our parents, so we can't walk anymore. No one's going to join that group. No one's going to join the hysterical team. But you can come together as people with functional neurological disorder. What's so weird, the weirdest thing, there's a patient in here who I talked to for 3 years. And I talked to her forever. And then with each of the patients, I tried to collaborate with them in their writing. And I gave her the pages, and it was like, I think in page proofs. And she said, I have to talk to you. And she called me and told me she'd been raped by her father. And that was not the story she'd been telling me for 3 years. And I had to rewrite her whole chapter and make it anonymous. But these stories are insanely difficult to tell. She had not told that story to her doctors. She had not thought it was relevant to her condition. And when she told me this story, I thought, oh my God, Freud wasn't so far off. There are lots of reasons this can happen. It's not the only one. But this is what she told me. And weirder still, she had gone to a touch therapy clinic, which is what Freud did before he would touch his patients.
He would press their foreheads.
Press their foreheads because he wasn't good at hypnosis, as Breuer was. And so this 21st century woman was describing not just the same problems that Freud described, but the same therapies from the 1880s. We have to stop and ask questions, get audience questions.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
We're supposed to get questions.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. There's someone in the back.
You kind of dropped a bombshell at the very first moment when you said that you first learned of Pappenheim when your father, a day before your father died, that he considered this his great essay. How could you just say that and leave it be? And had you not known your father had an interest in Pappenheim prior to this dramatic moment?
I thank you for the question. That's a really great question. So the first chapters of the book are kind of about my dad. And, fathers and sons. My father ranted on and on and on about Pappenheim, and I paid absolutely no attention to him, right? I was like, oh, God, he's going on about Bertha Pappenheim again. When will he stop? Which he really did. I mean, my father really went on and on. And then he was gone, and I hadn't paid any attention. And there was this manuscript. And it's not, my dad was very, very, very smart and extremely learned. but he was not a good writer. And it's not clear what he was saying to me. I mean, he really liked Breuer, and he was very interested in the non-theoretical, non-didactic, open play of their conversation. And he was very interested in Pappenheim, partly because of her anti-Zionism, partly because of her my dad worked a lot with, he was a psychiatrist, and he worked a lot at Harlem Hospital, and he worked at a place called Creative Arts Therapy, and he worked with a lot of kids who were really, really in terrible shape, and he was very pragmatic in his treatment of them. And I think, though I can't swear to it, that he was really impressed by Pappenheim's pragmatic treatment of her patients. You know, art therapy. There was a lot of art therapy at New Eisenberg. There was a lot of like, they learned to type, they learned to clean, they learned to cook, they learned basic skills so that they could support themselves in things other than prostitution. And they made communities. And I think my dad was really interested in those anti-theoretical and pragmatic forms of treatment that Pappenheim and Breuer represented for him. But I do think part of the story was simply that, like any kid, when my father was alive, I didn't listen to the things that I wished I had listened to after he was gone.
Thank you for your book, and thank you for the talk. I
Thank
have a
you, Mary.
question, starting with, well, basically it's a feminism question. And I wanted you to connect, if you can, her feelings about psychotherapy and her feelings about psychoanalysis to her feminism, starting with the fact that she sat next to her father while he was dying, and her brother was off in college, which she couldn't do because they wouldn't let girls in at that time. And then I think one of you said that she got mad at everybody and she would get angry with people. Not really, she got angry at men.
Yes,
And I think
absolutely.
that's really important.
That is a better way of putting it.
And also because she was furious with the male leaders of the Jewish community who allowed the traffic in women, who wouldn't let women vote in the Jewish community, who undereducated girls. So I think somehow we have to draw some kind of connection, and it's hard for me to draw that connection. I'm curious how you guys see it.
So that's Marion Kaplan, whose book about the Judicial Freud run came out. Well, it was essential to my understanding of the whole thing. So the question is, can I connect her feminism to her relation to psychoanalysis? Well, okay. So historically, the way it's done is terrible, right? There are sort of two strands that are very reductive, and they mostly can connect her hysteria to her feminism, right? There's the Freudian connection, which says that she hated men, and that's why she was hysterical, and that's why her sexual repression describes her entirely. That's sort of awful. And then there's a sort of 80s feminism. Hysteria is proto-feminism, right? Which I have all kinds of difficulties with. Her hostility to psychoanalysis is something that Anna Freud says is true, and there's some writing about it, and there's some reported things that she said, that she would not have psychoanalysis in her house. Some of which we have written down, some of which we don't. Everybody in Vienna knew that she was Anna O, but she never talked about it. She never addressed Freud publicly. I mean, psychoanalysis says that women are just sick, right? They all have penis envy, right? They're all basically not okay. And she didn't have much truck with it, right? She didn't really she didn't spend, as far as I know, a lot of her life talking about it.
My understanding, and I don't have a good answer to your question, which is a wonderful
Yeah, I'm
question.
fumbling around and trying to answer your question and
is-
not succeeding.
But my understanding is that, and I think this probably also comes from Anna Freud. I think that's where I know this from as well, is that the women that she worked with, which, you know, as we've talked about, were a lot of them, that she did not, she wanted to make sure that they were not being treated psychoanalytically. Like, she wanted to keep psychoanalysis well away from what she was doing. But yeah, I don't have a good answer that's not just like absolute speculation. And I also don't want to do the sort of like I mean, there's a lot of interesting things to be said about the relationship between hysteria and feminism, but her relationship to psychoanalysis, which, I mean, of course, is not even psychoanalysis at the point where she's being treated. It's so personal,
Well,
right? And I'm so hesitant, given the context in which we're speaking about all of the ways in which she's been misrepresented, to like add yet another speculative narrative to that. But I will be thinking about that question.
well,
Thank you for it.
I'm sorry, I'm cutting you
No,
off.
you're fine.
I'm really interested in her relationship to Freud, the person, and
Yeah.
Freud's relationship to her,
Yeah.
more than I am into the, like,
Because they were at dinner parties together, right?
when they
in
were
the-
young. But he must have known everything she was doing. There's no way he didn't. Right? That letter that she sends to Felix Warburg, that letter came to the Freud house. It came to Martha. Martha was writing to her mother about her. Would Sigmund let Martha write a check to the Judische Frauenbund? I have no idea. Right? But when she comes to Vienna working for women's suffrage, he comes up with this story about the pregnancy. So his thinking about her personally, this very attractive woman who he didn't get to marry, who was, you know, very marriageable, like who he was obsessed with his entire life. I mean, I think his obsession with her, the person, shapes psychoanalysis profoundly.
You're getting to one of my favorite parts of your book, where you have this line. This is one of those like psychoanalytic things, like anything that's a throwaway line is actually really important, where you say something, and I think it's in the context of the FND patients that you're talking about, but it works even better in some ways about Freud and Bertha Pappenheim, that for the doctors, their patients are more important to them than the other way around. That they loom so, that these patients loom so large.
Well, that's
in
true.
the doctors' lives.
That's true.
In ways that is not reciprocally true.
That's
Yeah.
true of the people in the studies of hysteria.
Yeah.
Of kind of all of them. All these women are so important to Freud, and you know, he's some funny doctor who came and treated me and said,
Presses their forehead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe they see him at a ball later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm
I think
sorry
that-
I don't have a better
I
answer,
think-
Marion.
Yeah.
Thank you. In a follow-up to the last question, perhaps to cast Bertha in a different light, I was corresponding earlier today with an American scholar friend of mine who's residing in Israel about tonight's lecture, and he wrote to me, he said, when you see a picture of Glaucon of Hamelin, it's actually Bertha Pappenheim dressed as her. Do we have any documentation of this? And this would put Bertha in Bertha's feminism and relationship to such a seminal feminist Jewish figure in Germany in a very different light.
So now this is you're going to have to help me because I don't know as much. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, it is true that she dressed as her, that she translated her works, and that, you know, I mean, the problem with writing about Pappenheim is that there's so much; it's endless. But yes, I don't know that every picture of, and I can't say the name, Glaucon. Okay. is Pappenheim, but there are pictures of, you can find very easily a picture of Bertha Pappenheim dressed as Glockel, performing as Glockel. She translated her works, I guess, from what to what? Yiddish to German? But like I said, while she was doing that, she was writing plays and short stories and poems and prayers, and she was at the same time that she was running around all over Europe. I mean, she was just this person of enormous energy, and that's one of the many things she did in her life.
I think we have time for one more question.
My Oma grew up near Neu-Isenburg, and like you, as I'm growing up in New York, I'm 73 now, I had no idea when she kept on talking about Bertha Pappenheim. But around 1990, she gave me a necklace, and she was telling me the story how Tante Helena got this necklace and that she was there and everything. And I said, please write this down. I will never remember this. And she wrote it on B'nai B'rith women's stationery. During COVID, I'm Facebooking with someone from Germany, and he mentions Bertha Pappenheim. And I go, I know that name. I have a necklace from her. So I went through my stuff, and I found it, and I called up Frank Mecklenburg, and I said, I have a necklace and a letter here, how Bertha Pappenheim gave it to her. And he said, you should contact the people in Neu-Isenburg, because Helena Kramer grew up in the orphanage, even though her mother was still alive, but there were 8 children, and she couldn't take care of the baby. And then she became the director and then the two of them went to Ukraine and were helping prostitutes and single women, whatever. And I then donated the necklace, and the expert who was looking at it said, this is made by Bertha Pappenheim. So in addition to all those things you talked, she was very good doing jewelry. And then Mandy Patinkin's people called me up for that podcast. Unfortunately, I didn't have all of the facts when he interviewed me. Helena Kramer gets to New York in the summer of '38, but has a tourist visa. America sends her back, because I couldn't understand how she gave testimony at Kristallnacht on how the orphanage was burnt down if she's in New York, according to the records when she took the ship over here. And then that painting that you have at Leo Beck of Bertha Pappenheim, she must have taken it from the orphanage on Kristallnacht, and then she went to France, then she went to Portugal, she took a ship to Cuba, she flew from Havana to Miami, came up to Washington Heights, then donates that portrait to Leo Beck in like 1960. Then she lives in the Daughters of Jacob in the Bronx, and they treat her like a social worker. They give her her own little office in the place. And then when she died, it took me 4 years to get her death certificate to prove I was next of kin. She's buried in the Breuer Jewish Cemetery in Clifton, New Jersey. Is that the same Breuer, or is that at the Rabbi Breuer?
No idea. I assume not.
So I tried Googling, but you get no reception down here. It's a different one.
Yeah.
Okay. But then the coincidence is, she was a feminist. She wasn't really that orthodox, but she's buried in the Breuer Congregation Clifton Cemetery in New Jersey.
Thank you.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you.
I think we could talk on forever and ever, but in the interest of everybody coming together for the reception and continuing the conversation, I first of all want to thank Gabe and Abby for a beautiful, inspiring evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you touched us all, both here, and I'll leave it to everybody's imagination where else you felt touched by all these conversations. But this was beautiful, many questions left open. A few I think we can definitely answer. One is we should all buy and read Gabe's book, and we should all read what Abby has been writing on these topics and listen to her podcast and to our podcast, particularly the episode about Neu-Isenburg, which features Helene Krämer. So many things are coming together. Thank you all for making this such a beautiful evening.
The book is for sale in the bookstore, and I will sign them.
Okay, there you
Just
go.
so you know.
I cried several times. It's like you can't
Also-
stop reading it.
Ordinary Unhappiness is a really good podcast.
Thank you.
This is a hard act to follow, but please consider coming back a week from now for the third installment when filmmaker Amanda Rubin will discuss the book The Third Reich of Dreams, in which Charlotte Berath collected the dreams of witnesses of the rights of Nazism. The filmmaker Amanda Rubin helped get this book republished, and she will discuss this with the senior book editor of The Atlantic magazine, Gal Beckermann, a week from today. Thank you all for coming. Please join our speakers outside at the reception. Thank you.